we'll get started, everyone. Sorry about it took a little bit. We're just having a bit of technical difficulties. Welcome to our Fundamentals webinar series. So, this is run by StockSense. So, we're a project run by the Victorian Farmers Federation. We're funded by the Cattle Compensation Fund and the Sheep and Goat Compensation Fund, and we're proudly delivered by the VFF Livestock Group. So, StockSense was established to help Victorian livestock producers maintain and improve animal health, welfare, and as well as Victoria's overall biosecurity status. So, we do this through numerous ways. We run educational workshops, webinars, and we develop fact sheets, which are on our website, and we distribute of related industry material through social media and e-newsletters. So this is it's part of a four-part series. So we have this one tonight with Christine and also tomorrow night with Christine. That one's on getting livestock ready. We have another one on the 28th, and that's with Andrea Redgewell. So that's on livestock care, animal health, nutrition, and welfare. And then on the 29th of January, we have one with Peter Ronalds, who's doing regenerative futures and smarter farm planning. So tonight, Christine will be doing this presentation. She will discuss key considerations for people owning or buying a small farm, including setting goals, choosing the right property, livestock suitability, basic infrastructure, and land functionality. The webinar will focus on practical decision making for small landholders with examples relevant to cattle, sheep, and goats. So a bit of housekeeping before we start. So there's a Q&A at the end. So throughout the presentation, feel free to type in the questions, but we'll get to them at the end. So an hour of presentation and 30 minutes for the questions. After this, the slides will be sent out via email along with a link to the recording at the conclusion. So feel free to go back and check out anything that you want to see again. And at the end of the final webinar, so the fourth one, we'll appreciate any feedback. So we'll send out a survey. So feel free to give feedback to that. And if you want to see more about our project or any other webinars, subscribe to the VFS Stock Sense on YouTube. This is ways to stay in touch with us. So we have Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. That's our email there. So if you want to get in touch, just send us an email, and that's our website there. So we might get started. I'll pass over Christine, and she'll kick off the presentation.
Hey everyone, thanks Jack for the introduction. I hope you can all see that it was my end with the technical difficulties, so apologies there. So I'm going to chat to you a little bit tonight about farming fundamentals, getting started with farming. And so this is relevant to if you've got a farm but you're not really sure what it is that you're doing with it, or if you're hoping to look for a farm, what is it that you're looking for? And these are the sorts of things that I tend to work through with my clients of how to assess a property to know what it is that you've got. And this is really, really rudimentary, but these are the things that you probably need to be looking out for. So I am going to try and focus in a little bit more on the ideas of cattle, sheep, and goats, and they are all livestock that we do run here on our little 50 acres down on the Mornington Peninsula. I'm not going to talk about horses at all because they are quite specialized, and to be honest, I don't know anything about horses at all. So I will continue to talk back and mention cattle, sheep, and goats. So oops, a little bit about me, if it will let me go to the next screen, which there it is. Who am I? So, you can see there, that's me with my grandpa and my grandma and my brother. And that was before my grandfather died, just in 1990. And he actually bought this property back in the 1950s. So it's been in our family since then. And he started record keeping about 19 in the 1970s when he moved here. He died, as I said, in 1990. We moved here just after that when I was about 13. And I've lived here ever since, which is in some ways kind of sad. Right now, I'm a mum to three gorgeous teenagers. My daughter there, she's allergic to pretty much everything under the sun, so she doesn't help. But my ferals there, they do come out and help quite a bit, especially with things like milking the goats in the mornings, or if we're needing help moving cattle or the sheep. They're awesome. They've learned how to drive the tractor. And so part of what I'm doing is teaching them how to come and live on this land and work it and be productive. And in doing that, especially when I was a kinder mum, I kind of realized that there was a little bit of a gap in the knowledge that local hobby farmers had in that they kind of didn't know what it was that they were doing. And this is all the stuff that I do every day with our farm here. It's my dad's farm, but I manage it. So I'm the one who's deciding what the ram is that we're going to use over our ewes and when it is that they're going to lamb and what sort of machinery it is that we need, if we need new tractors, when we need to get new hay. That's all my job. And so I realized there was kind of a bit of this gap in the market. And so when I came up with the idea of Karma Farmer, and so now I work as a consultant and how to manage their farm, how to look after it, how to assess it, and make sure that it's doing what they want it to do right from the word go. So I guess kind of tapping back into my teaching days that I sent through to Jack. So I'm hoping you've all got that one. If you didn't, that was just something to kind of fill in and think about as we were going. So if you don't have that, you might be able to grab it later and just fill it in. But if you do have that and you've printed it up, the very first thing on there is what is your farming purpose and list anything that's relevant to you. So any of these ideas are relevant, they're all valid. So was it a lifestyle thing that made you come and choose to move on to a hobby farm or want to look to move on to a hobby farm? Is it the idea of sustainability? Did you do it for the kids? That's something that I hear quite a lot, that they want their kids to be involved with the land and learn where their food comes from and have the space. Were you talked into it by a significant other? Did you maybe inherit it or did you view it as a business opportunity? So all of these are really valid reasons for having a farm. None of them is more valid than any of the others. But knowing what your purpose is going to help you to work out what it is that you're going to need for your situation. So the second question that I've got on that handout is, what are your farming goals and what are the possible ventures or enterprises that you might be considering? So as I said, I'm going to focus in more on cattle, sheep, and goats, but I do touch briefly on some of the other things that you can do in parallel if you are running goats, sheep, or cattle. So possible enterprises can be cattle. And by cattle, there's obviously several different varieties. We've got beef cattle here, but you can also get dairy cattle. And of course, you can get miniature cattle as well. So it's not just, well, I want cows, it's what sort of cow do you want? And even within that, there's different varieties. So knowing narrow then down what breed it is you're going to get. Again, dairy goat. So I've been a dairy goat breeder since I was 14, which is a hideously long time. But I can talk to the cows come home about dairy goats and everything that you need about dairy goats. But they are very, very different to things like wool goats, which are different again to meat goats. So what is it that you want to do with that goat if you're going to have it? Because that's going to therefore impact the type of goat that you're going to have. Poultry, different sorts of poultry. Are they meat? Are they egg? Are they something that's going to sit out there in your vegetable garden and eat all the pests that are there? Sheep, lots and lots of different sorts of sheep. We've got Dorpers predominantly, but we used to have Suffolk. And the reason that we've gone into the Dorpers is because with my dad getting older, he was struggling a little bit with crutching and things like that and didn't want to have to deal with that side of things. So we've moved over to the Dorpers. They're a meat sheep. They sell quite well in the meat markets, but that might not be the reason that you want to have them. Maybe you want to have them for milk. Maybe you want to have them for wool. Maybe you want to have them because they look pretty. Think baby dolls and valet and those sorts of things. Because all of these, again, are valid reasons, provided that's what suits you and your enterprise. And I've also got bees. So they are obviously different to the larger animals, but they are still something that requires appropriate keeping. You need to be able to look after them and have everything to be able to manage those. Other possible enterprises that don't necessarily center around animals are production of fruit, cropping, vegetables. You might even have a small vegetable garden or want to do that. You might have an orchard. Maybe you're wanting to produce eggs. That's a candle that I made out of wax from my bees. You might want milk. You might want meat, you might want wool. So knowing exactly what it is that you are wanting to get out of your enterprise, especially your livestock, is going to go a really, really long way towards helping you to narrow down exactly what you're going to get to satisfy that criteria. So that comes to that really big question of why do you want them? And this is what I always ask my clients. Why do you want that animal? What is their purpose? Is it meat, fiber, milk, lawn mowing? Is it because they're going to look pretty? Is it for breeding? Is it for eggs? Really narrow in down on why is it that you want that. And again, for plants, what is their purpose? So there's a whole list of things there: home consumption, grain, seed collection, fresh produce sales, nursery, cooked goods, cut flowers, honey, soap, candles. Really narrow in on that. Don't just get something because you just want it. Make sure that you're getting the right thing for you. Knowing why you want something is going to help you to determine exactly what is right for you, as well as what you're going to need for it. So that even comes down to making sure that your property is the right size. If you are on a 2 acre block, you're not going to be able to support cattle. You might be able to support 1 or 2 sheep, but there are definitely going to be times when you are going to have to hand feed. It really depends on the type of sheep that they are, what it is that they're doing, and what you want them to do. Your infrastructure, again, for cattle is going to be very different to it's going to be for sheep. You might go, yeah, but I've got yards. And as I'll show you later, cattle yards are really, really different to sheep yards. And they need to be because they're very, very different animals. Your livestock type. So I've mentioned before that dairy goats are very different to meat goats, which are very, very different to wool goats. So they're all going to have different needs, which are going to link back to things like your infrastructure, like your feed, like your water. So knowing what that is will help you to determine what you're going to need for it. And if you can work that out before you go out and get them, it's going to save you with money and time. And a really good example of that is I went to a presentation, it was a couple of years ago now, a goat farmer, and he was talking about when they first bought their farm, they were so excited and they went out and bought about 20 boar goats and they put them on the property and they went out the next day and they were gone. And they'd gone through the fences because the fences weren't right. And so they changed the fences and they brought all the goats back and they got up the next day and they were gone again. And in the end, they actually had to replace the fences 3 times before they got the fences right. So they had to get fences out, contractors out to come and fix and replace those fences. It cost them money, it cost them time, and they were getting out onto roads and into neighbors' properties. And you really don't want to pee people off by having your animals on their land. So you're saving yourself money and time by getting it right at the start. Peri-urban farming has got specific considerations as well as the ones that are there for sort of all farmers. So have you got the time? Have you got the money? Do you actually have the knowledge to be able to do that particular enterprise that you are wanting to introduce onto your farm? Do you have the manpower to do it? And do you actually have the skills? So not just the knowledge of what it is that you might need to do, but you actually have the physical skills to be able to do that. If you can't do some of those things, and let's be honest, no farmer can do everything, are you able to find reliable contractors to do that, to use, and do you have appropriate, reliable equipment to be able to do those things? Are you aware of your neighbours and some of the things that you need to have in place so that you are not peeing your neighbours off? That includes things like noise and pollution. We are next to a vineyard and they crank up their machinery really early in the morning, which annoys the crap out of me when I'm trying to sleep. But it's all still within the regulations that they are allowed to do it within those hours on those days. So just make sure you're really aware of that. And accessibility. Is everybody able to get in and access everything? And what are the council rules and regulations for the things that you might want to do there? So something that sort of brings brings a whole heap of those together. An example that I like to use is, and it's something that most of us will face at some stage if we're on a property, is a big tree or branch falls down on a fence and breaks it, and it's got some livestock in that paddock. So number one is, do you actually have the time to get out there and fix it? Do you have the time to move your sheep or your cattle or your goats? It's going to cost money to repair that fence because you're probably going to have to at least pay for some sort of wires or gripples or possibly even posts. So, do you have the money to do that? Do you have the knowledge to be able to do those things? Do you have the manpower? Because sometimes, if it's a big tree, you need more than one person to do those things. Do you have the skills? So you might need to use a chainsaw. Have you got the right sort of chainsaw? There's you're talking about your reliable equipment. Have you got the right sort of wires? Have you got the gripples? Have you got the fence tensioners? So have you got all of those sorts of things so that you can fix that fence and hopefully put it all back together before your animals go next door or go onto a road or even just get into the wrong paddock and maybe you end up with unwanted pregnancies in your animals that you weren't ready for. So this is sort of all the time. If it's just a weekender, that's sort of throwing another spanner into the works as well, because if that does happen and you're not there, who's going to fix that up for you? So how to make farming easier. So there's some do's and there's some don'ts. So do understand your property capabilities, and I will talk about that further. Align this with your potential goals and ventures. And I think of this, if I was on the screen, I would show you a kind of, it's like a bit like a little bit like a Venn diagram. One circle is what your property is actually capable of, and the other end is what you want to do with it. And the more that those two circles overlap, the less that you've then got to do with it later. If they don't overlap as well as you would like, you're going to have to make changes to be able to facilitate that. But as you're doing that, you need to plan, 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 and think forwards. Make sure that everyone that is a part of this farm is on the same page. Don't make impulsive buys. Don't just say, I bought some sheep because I wanted them. A friend of mine, her husband did that and they ended up with these 3 sheep. They didn't even have a shed to put the sheep in and the fences were wrong. And she said he just came home one day with these 3 sheep and said, I bought some sheep because I wanted them. And then it was just such hard work for them to then get everything ready for these sheep when they already had them and didn't know where to put them. Don't start really big without having the correct foundations in place. And that's a bit like that boar goat story that I told you before. And don't make assumptions. Another story that I've got with somebody down here, I went and did a tour of his property, and he was telling me about how they had these magnificent stables set up on their property and how wonderful it was. It cost them however many hundreds of thousands of dollars to set up, and they were going to move it because they decided that it was in the wrong place. And that just boggles my brain. It's nice that they've got the money to A, be able to build stables like that, but then B, even think of, well, we're just going to move it. So that's that idea of planning and really making sure that when you are building something or purchasing something, that you're thinking long term so that you're not having to get rid of it or, oh, it's just not meeting our needs anymore. So that comes back to that question of, can your property or the property that you're viewing do what it is that you need it to do based on those goals that you want to achieve in relation to your ventures or your enterprises? So the first that you've just bought and you've moved there or you own it or it's something that you're looking at getting, what are the things that you need to look at? So the first thing is animal welfare. Are they actually going to suit the land? So we, as I said, we've got Dorper sheep and we have quite a lot of wet patches on our property. Dorper sheep are bred for arid land, and so their feet don't cope when they get really soggy. So we actually need to make sure that in winter we move our sheep to a paddock that means that their feet will actually be okay. Make sure that your land size, the layout of the paddocks, the soil, and the actual capabilities are going to suit what it is that you want to do. Look at the pasture and the vegetation condition. Is there actually some there? Is it full of weeds? What's actually in that pasture? Is it going to be okay for the livestock that you want? What's the climate like? Even based on different times of the year. You might find that climate might be right at some times of the year, but other times of the year it's very, very different. Look at your infrastructure, exactly what is there, everything that is there, and I'll go through a brief list with that. And of course, water, which is hugely important. We all need water. You need to have a consistent supply of water for everything that you're going to be doing there. So with your animal welfare requirements, this is quite a big slide. There is a link that I've put down there specifically in relation to cattle, but that's for the animal welfare standards. So they're there to provide a basis for the consistent Australian legislation as well as to provide guidance for all people with livestock animals. So this is not just in relation to big commercial ventures. This is also in relation to people who even have only one or two livestock animals. It's relevant to everybody. You need to make sure that they've got the right nutrition so that they are growing properly, they're growing healthy. You need to make sure that they've got clean, accessible water at all times. They need to have social contact, usually with another member of their species. If you've got one goat, they're going to go through fences until they can find somebody to keep them company. You've got two goats, much, much less likely to go through fences. So they really need that social contact. They need sufficient space to be able to move around and behave in a normal way for them. So, whether that's running around or it's just interacting with each other, they need to have that sufficient space. You can't have them sort of boxed up all of the time. With your handling facilities, you need to make sure that they're designed in such a way that they're reducing stress when you're utilizing them. So, yards, if they're especially if they're professionally designed, are usually set up in such a way that they try to minimize the stress that's associated with those. Same deal if you're using sheds or even just milking facilities. You want to make sure that you're trying to reduce the amount of stress that they're exposed to. Using procedures to minimize pain, injury, and disease. So, if you are going to have animals, you need to learn how to use some of those procedures. And ultimately, you are going to need to think at some point about whether you need to euthanize and how you're going to go about doing that. So, I flat out refuse to have a gun license. My dad's got a gun license. I flat out refuse to do it. I know that I can't shoot anything, and I've always said I'm not a real farmer because of that. I just pretend, but I'm quite happy to get someone out to give them a green dream if I need to. And sometimes that is just part of farming that they need to be euthanized. So, how are you going to do that? You need to be able to provide appropriate treatment based on what's happening. So that might just be docking. You might need to dock tails. Are you able to do that, and do you have the equipment to be able to do that? You need to be able to reduce the risk of predation, and that's really specific for sheep and goats because their babies are quite small. So I'll show you on a property plan a bit later on. But here we have our lambing paddock very, very close to the house, and we've got certain measures set up with the fences to try and reduce foxes being able to access them. You need precautions against extreme weather, especially like that heat and the flooding and storms. So make sure that there's something in place so that your animals are protected as well as possible, even if it means that if you know that there's going to be a really horrible day, you need to move them into another paddock. You need to be thinking about their welfare. And you need to assess the need to undertake any husbandry procedures. Do you actually need to do that? So these are two properties that I've been to, and you can see they've both got kind of a similar kind of layout. This one here on the left, you can see it's got the one entrance. There's some infrastructure there at the end of the entrance, and he's got his paddock set out so that you can rotationally graze. There's shelter in the form of trees in most of those paddocks. I know that he's actually put out a whole heap of tree breaks along a lot of those paddock boundaries so that he was trying to increase the amount of natural shade that there was. He's got water in all of those. So he's made sure that the property is set out as well as he can to suit all of the animals. And it's the same with the property on the right. Very, very different property. This lady actually uses her place for occupational therapy, and but it's still got the same. There's one main entrance there. You can see most of the infrastructure is one side. She's got quite clearly defined paddocks and they're able to rotationally graze if they need to. And there is shelter in every single paddock. She's got some quite small boxes, horse boxes and things set up on hers. So they've both got really similar setups in that regard. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is soil. That's actually a handful of compost, but it looked prettier than the handful of dirt that I picked up. So in terms of soil, there's a number of things that you're looking for. First is the type of soil that you've got. And you might go, well, dirt is dirt, but it's not. Dirt soil is different. We've got a number of different types of soil here on our property, and we need to manage them differently. We've got a lot of clay, and it's quite near to the surface. We don't have like really, really deep topsoil. We hit the subsoil and the clay pretty soon after starting to dig. But we've got areas of soil that's called known as sodic. And so that means that it gets waterlogged pretty quickly when it rains. And then as it starts to dry, and if we put our cattle or our sheep in there, they churn it up and it loses its soil structure really, really quickly. So it's not in our best interests to have livestock on there, especially when it's wet, because then when it dries, it becomes water repellent, it crusts, it forms cracks, and it's really, really difficult for any of the vegetation to be able to take hold and to put roots deep down. So we need to be really careful, especially when it's wet, of how we treat that soil. So knowing the type of soil that you've got is really important. The depth of it, so how deep is it that the roots are able to grow? How deep is it that there's going to be nutrients and things there? How deep is it before you hit rocks or clay? What are the nutrient levels like? If you've got really low nutrient levels, even though you might be spreading stuff out, that might be saying something about the microbial levels that are present in your soil, and maybe they're not breaking things down well enough. So it's important to have a good idea that there's actually nutrient levels available in your soil. pH, some soils are naturally acidic, some are naturally basic. Depending on what it is that you've got growing there, some things are going to grow better in slightly acidic, others are going to grow better where it's slightly basic. So knowing that pH of your soil, and sometimes you can do things to ameliorate that if it seems to be a bit more one way or the other. So knowing that and then how to tweak that slightly can be helpful. Organic matter is really important because that's kind of like the glue that holds everything together. So that's your dead matter, that's dead leaves, dead vegetation, dead animals, it's manure, and it sort of sinks down into the soil and it helps to hold everything together. It gives the soil its structure. So it's acting like glue. But at the same time, it's acting like a sponge because it's helping to absorb and retain moisture in the soil. So the more organic matter you've got, the better the soil structure and the better the moisture retention is going to be. If you've got more organic matter, it acts like a slow nutrient release. And so slowly being let out for the plants that are there. And if you've got that organic matter, hopefully you'll have microbial life that is living in there and allowing things like your bacteria to help to recycle the nutrients that you're needing. And so this is where we are going way back to year 9 or thereabouts. Some of you might have traumatic amnesia and you're going, oh, I remember the nitrogen cycle or the carbon cycle or whatever. That's why you need those things there because there's so many things present in the soil that are going to be cycling those things through. And if they're not in the soil, you're not going to get that cycling happening. So with land capability, that's sort of taking a whole heap of things into account and then putting them all together. And then it means that you can almost kind of rate that particular part of your property, and we give them classes depending on what it's actually capable of doing. The lower classes 1 and 2, they're pretty much capable of doing anything, and they're often used for cropping and vegetation and things like that. They've got really nice deep soil. They generally have no slope. They've got high fertility. Whereas things up around the 7 and the 8, they are really low capability. They might be gorges. They might have high erosion. They might be really sloped or really, really rocky. And so we say they're areas that more need to be protected. So if you look at this photo here, that was actually during COVID. And so we made it a bit of a project. We knew that we had to fence off this area of our creek. And you can see because my grandfather had allowed the cattle to have access to the creek. And so they would literally just walk into the creek bed. And so they were actually causing the creek bed to sort of fall apart and lose its structure. And so these trees are just falling in. And so we've recognized that this is actually not good either for the creek or the soil. And so we said, all right, we've got some time. We're going to fence it off. And we revegetated it. And that's because we recognized that this was a low capability area. So when you're looking at your capability, you're pulling a whole heap of things together. You're looking at aspect. So what direction is it actually facing? Is it north? Is it south? Is it east? Is it west? So we've got a gentle slope that heads down and it's all facing north, which in winter is actually pretty good because it's getting that much extra sun on it when the sun is out. And so we will actually get slightly more growth on that north side than we would on the south because it's getting that extra warmth. But in summer, that's going to dry out faster because it's getting that extra warmth. So thinking about the aspect, the soil type, as I've already, excuse me, mentioned, the slope. So how sloped is it? So you can see there's a gentle slope on ours. Some have no slope at all. Drainage. We've got a couple of areas where there's sort of like a little ditch or a little pool area, and in winter the water just sits there, and because we've got quite a lot of clay soil, the water doesn't drain away. So knowing that you've got good drainage, because that water that sits there, especially over winter when it's really cold, it goes kind of scummy and disgusting until it evaporates away. It's really kind of gross. So knowing that you've got good drainage will affect climate as well. You can have great aspect, great soil, great slope drainage, but if you've got a horrible climate, then that's going to reduce your land capability. With your vegetation, there's different types of vegetation that you are going to be looking at and assessing. So this is a picture of some grass in the paddock, but not all grasses are created the same. So what is actually present and how much of it is present? So you can do something that's called a quadruped, where you literally put a square out on the ground and you count the different varieties that are present within that quadrant. And you can do that any number of times within a paddock. You'll find that it will change. The different varieties will change their percentage depending on where it is in the paddock that you put it. What are the varieties that are there? You really want there to be more than one variety. And are they suitable? So you might go tall fescue is awesome, and it is. It's a great crop to have for your in your pasture. But if your cattle get too much of it, they can get fescue toxicity. So knowing that maybe there's too much of that and whether that's suitable for your livestock is worth knowing. Same deal with clover. If your sheep get into a big patch of just clover and that's all there is, and we want clover, clover is magnificent. It makes sure that we get that nitrogen cycling through. So we really, for the nitrogen fixation, so we really do want things like clovers and other legumes in your soil. But if your sheep get into a big patch of just clover and you're not careful with managing that, they can end up with bloat. And that's a horrible thing, watching a sheep die from bloat. So making sure that the vegetation you've got is suitable. And remember that at different times of the year, you're going to have different vegetations, especially in paddocks. Trees aren't going to change much, but grasses will. And what we've got out there in our paddocks right now is very, very different to what we have in 6 months' time in the middle of winter. So it's something that if you're going to do an assessment, you might want to do it several times throughout the year to see how it changes. So I've got some images here of some different types of vegetation. So this one is just a paddock. There's lots of, But knowing what's out there and what it will suit. If you've got something called barley grass, some of you will go, oh my God, barley grass, horrible stuff. And it is. It's got a horrible reputation and it absolutely deserves it. It's one of the first things that will germinate after the autumn break. So if you've got it, it actually will provide you with that first flush of growth for your livestock. And that's awesome. But when it gets to seeding, it becomes unpalatable. Your stock won't eat it. It produces this horrible spiky seeds that get stuck in your socks if you're stupid enough not to wear gumboots, and gets caught in livestock eyes. It gets caught in their wool, gets caught in their hair, and they can end up with abscesses. So barley grass, knowing if you've got that, good, get rid of it. This is a tree break. So if you're going to plant out tree breaks, they're fantastic in terms of protection for your livestock from wind, from rain, from sun. Make sure that you're putting species out there that are suitable to your environment and that they're not toxic to your livestock. You want to have different sorts, some that are going to provide a canopy and some that are sort of going to be bushier so that they're actually going to stop that wind from coming through. We put all of ours in tree breaks because we found that our livestock were ringbarking our trees. So we now put them along the boundaries of all of our paddocks. And that's actually good for another reason, in that it provides a double boundary between our livestock. So it's much harder for them to break through and get into each other if that's what they really want to do, because they've got two fences to go through, plus a bit of a visual barrier as well if there's trees there. Another thing, some people will go, but you put trees there, then you're not going to get grass. It's actually been proven that if you have the right sorts of trees in your tree breaks and in the right places, especially when winds come through, they actually help to prevent moisture evaporation or slow it down. So you'll actually find that if you've got those sorts of tree breaks there, they will retain moisture behind them or around them for longer than if they weren't there. And those areas behind them will stay cooler, especially on hotter days. So they're actually better to have than none. And this is an area where we've got our dam, and we very rarely allow access to livestock there. A, because they'll ring bark trees because that's what they do. But B, this is the catchment area for the water that is coming into that dam. And generally, if you've got a dam, you don't want trees on the walls because they will grow roots through that will then cause the walls to get holes in them and they'll leak. But the catchment area tree, you actually want there to be vegetation because it acts like a filter. And so we try to keep this area with enough vegetation that it's allowing it to filter through. We occasionally let the livestock in just to sort of chew everything down. We don't allow them to have a long time in there, and it depends on the time of year. Because if you've got them in there when there's water flowing in, they'll actually foul the walls. And where it is and what it's doing will help you to work out how advantageous that is. Climate, I think we've seen some really big signs of how fickle the climate can be, especially um, over around lawn just in the last couple of weeks with both bushfires and then a flood. So if you've got a property or you're looking to buy a property, look at properties that are going to have bushfire overlays and you can kind of plan for that. Look at your rainfall. So don't just look at the overall rainfall for the year. Look at when does it actually arrive, during what months does it arrive, and how much of it do you get. Different areas are going to get different amounts. And it could be a really big difference between, could be just a 20-kilometer difference of where you're looking at two properties, but there could be a significant difference, and that could just be because of mountains or hills that are in between you and there. So if there is no local rain gauge that you can see, so we've got Cerberus that's near us, and so that's usually fairly consistent with what we've seen. You can get your own rain gauges. As I said, my grandfather started taking data down in the 70s, so we've got over 50 years worth of data for rainfall for here. and they have not missed a day of rainfall for writing it down. And so that means we can actually see that if I compare all of that data, I can see that the rainfall is slowly decreasing from what it was 50 years ago. What's temperature? And I'm not just talking about heat, I'm talking about things like frosts, because if you have animals that might be susceptible to frosts, especially when they're doing things like lambing or kidding, then you are going to need to make sure that you've got things in place to help protect them at those times. And it's the same if it's exceedingly hot. You don't want to have really, really hairy, woolly animals if you're going to be in a really, really hot environment. The direction that the wind comes from, I know you might go, but it comes from every direction. It actually doesn't. Down here, we very, very rarely get wind coming from the east. And so, but we will get it, especially at this time of the year, lots from the north in winter, lots from the south and from the west. But we very rarely get it from the east. So down here, if you've got an open-sided shed, they're almost all facing east. So when our neighbours across the road bought their property a couple of years ago, turned it into a horse property, they got somebody in to build a whole heap of horse shelters, and they all face south. They've all got an opening on the south, and that just blew my mind because I don't understand how a local contractor could possibly think that building open-sided horse shelters to the south was sensible because, as I said, when the south winds are coming through in winter, that bites and it's cold and they've got no shelter from that wind. Extreme weather events I have mentioned, so that's bushfires, floods, severe heat. It might be that you might need to move your livestock to a different paddock so that they're more sheltered. And the seasonality of climate as well. It's very, very different. Obviously, now we're in the middle of summer. It's very different in 6 months' time. So you need to be aware that things do change. We plan our lambing around the seasons. A lot of people will do theirs in June, July, because then there will be a little bit more feed later on in the year as the lambs are weaning. We found that we were losing a lot of lambs to exposure if they were lambing in sort of that June, July when it's particularly cold. So we moved our lambing to September, October. Vision, we recognize that if there's then maybe not enough feed, maybe we've got to hand feed out. But that's a decision we made based on seasonality and the differences within even just 2 to 3 months, the difference that can make on the survivability of your young. Infrastructure is a really big one, and I love this photo. I took this a couple of years ago on the way to my cousin's 40th in Edenhope, and it's because there's two reasons. One, the really obvious reason is that shed in the background, which obviously was having um, a bit of a hard day in terms of. The other one is that post that's at the front there. That post there is completely, almost completely rotted away. You can see that you can actually see the sun through parts of it. And that means that that post is pretty much not going to be able to do its job. And if you had any halfway determined animal in that paddock, they're going to knock that over or they're going to go through it because that is not going to be able to hold the wires in place. So your infrastructure is things like fences. And I'll talk about different sorts of fences, but you need different fences for cattle than you need for sheep, than you need for goats. Goats have got a really bad reputation for going through fences like there's no tomorrow. But if you've got the right sort of fence, they don't. And that might be a mix of it needing to be mesh as well as barbed, as well as maybe even live. But once you get that right, they'll learn and they won't do it. We have different sorts of fence for our cattle. They don't need nearly as many wires because they're much bigger. But we need something much smaller and mesh-like for the sheep because their babies are so small and they will go straight through a fence that we've got for cattle. Your shedding, the reason that you have your shedding, you really need to go back to that question of what is it that you want and what are they going to need. So if it's just a shed for hay or for housing a tractor, that's pretty basic. Make sure it's in the right place so that it's easy to access. But I've got dairy goats. So that means I need a shed with concrete floors because I am washing my milking stand and I don't want there to be a puddle of mud. I need to have power. I need to have lights because milking in the dark is not fun. I need water because I need to be cleaning up. So, and it needs to be partitioned so that I can separate everybody out. I don't want every single one of my goats in the one milking area shed at the same time. So the sheds that you have, you need to think about what purpose is that shed and is it going to fulfill that? Roadways, are they accessible? Are they accessible to any sort of machinery that is going to need to use it? Is it in good condition? Does it go where you need it to go? Yards, crush, and runs. I will show you the two images that I've got a little bit later on comparing cattle and sheep yards. Drains will be taking water to areas that you want it to go, whether it's to a dam or to a creek, or just making sure that it's going away from an area that pools, for example. Conservation works, they're often linked to drains. Dams, depending on what it is that they're doing, make sure they're in working order, make sure that they're not leaking, make sure that if you've got a dam that is actually doing what you want it to do, has it got pumps? Has it got irrigation facilities linked to it? What is it actually doing? Is the water going to it properly? Or do your drains and conservation works leak? Ours need maintenance. We have to look after ours. So we're often out there in winter fixing them up. And do you have a quarantine area? And I'll go into that in more depth tomorrow when I talk about bringing animals home and making sure you've got what they need. And last thing is making sure that they've all got shelter, need shelter from the sun, from the wind, from the rain, from the heat, from the cold. And this is going back to your welfare. So there's a couple of images, one of our dams up to the house. That's our driveway. It's wide, it's been fixed, it's really stable, it's got drains under it so we don't get water going over it and washing it away. It's close to, it goes straight up to the road, it's straight, it gives us some access into the paddocks if we need to go out into the paddocks. It's able to deal with trucks and tractors, so it's wide enough. You can see that we don't have trees growing in really close and constricting that. That's a picture of our cattle yards. We used to have timber ones until our bull actually knocked a whole heap of the posts over, which was not very helpful. So we got rid of the timber ones and we got some professional ones installed. And so you can see that it's got a proper crush there. It's got the proper concrete floor with the non-slip surface there, so that even if it gets wet or they poo on it, it's not going to get slippery. And it's got yards within it. I'll show you that in a tick. This is a really big shed that lines our driveway. And it actually started off with just the three big central ones. And we put it there specifically mostly for hay and also for tractor implements. But we also put it there because we knew that we had room to expand. And after we built that, we realized that we needed a new tractor. This was about 11 years ago. And so when we got the tractor, it didn't fit into our old tractor shed. So we built that second little one there for the tractor. And then we realized we needed new implements because our implements were all old and they didn't necessarily fit this one. So we got new implements and then they needed a shed. So if you're going to build a shed, make sure that it is doing what it is that you need it to do. And it's in such a place that if it with is stable that was in the wrong place and therefore needed to be moved. Gates. Gates are part of your infrastructure. Have you actually got functioning gates that do what you want them to do? And do you have drains if you need them? The next couple of slides or pictures are images of infrastructure that have gone bad. So this is actually from a client's property up in Queensland where they were building their access road to be able to get on where they were hoping to build, and they had a flood and it washed a whole heap of their driveway away and they were just devastated. But it also made them realize that the construction of their driveway wasn't adequate, and so they needed to work on making sure that that was appropriate, because if floods happened again, they'd be stuck. So this is quite embarrassing, but that happened here. And this was in one of our cow paddocks. And so we had those cow wires, and you can see most of them are plain. There's a couple of barbs. But in this particular paddock, we'd fenced off that part of the creek and we put a handful of sheep in there. And sheep have got this really nice insulating layer around them called wool. And so they don't notice things like barb unless they've literally just been shorn, and even then half of them don't notice it. And so they'd stick their head through, not notice anything, keep pushing. And it ended up with some of those wires there all kind of bound together by their wool. And so they were just having a wonderful time going in and out and in and out. And so that's a really good example of when a fence is good for one type of animal and not for another. This is one of the next door neighbors. And aside from the fact that that little shelter is actually falling apart, it's not going to provide any kind of wind shelter at all. So it may provide shelter from rain, it may provide shelter from the sun, but there's no walls around it at all. And aside from that, it looks like it's going to fall over. So that's not a great shelter for your livestock. And this one here was actually the irrigation outlet at the bottom of our old dam. And one day it packed it in and it literally just opened up and there was water everywhere. So it's old. It got installed when the dam was built, which was in the 60s, possibly. So it was old. But that meant that our whole dam needed to be renovated to take that out. So that was fairly frustrating for us. This is two examples of different types of yards. So the one on the left are our cattle yards, and the one on the right are sheep yards. So they've both got features in common. You can't see it in our one because of the angle at which I've taken the photo, but they've both got this curved fencing. So, and that helps to prevent animals from sort of all getting stuck in a corner, and it helps to reduce their stress levels a little bit. You can see that they've got gates that allow different parts of it to get sectioned off. They've each got a crush. You can see that the cattle crush is much, much larger than the sheep crush. Why can't you just put sheep through a cattle crush? You say, okay, well, that's cool. But if you've got lambs, they're going to go straight through those gaps in those fences. So that is not helpful. So, and also if you're actually going to use the crush part of it there, the part where the cattle head actually sits, the cow head actually sits, is too high for a sheep. And so your sheep head won't be held still within that. So you need to make sure that you've actually got infrastructure that's in place that suits your livestock, whether it's cattle or goats or sheep. And you can see that they've both got a loading ramp there as well. Water. Water is probably the most important thing. You need to have access to water. If you don't have water, you're kind of stuffed. The quality of the water does matter. So if you've got some manky old dam and you're hoping to give that to your livestock, that means they're drinking manky water. So you need to make sure, as part of that welfare stuff, that your animals are getting clean water and it's readily accessible to them at all times. So what is the source of that water? Is it tank water? Are you getting it as runoff from somewhere? Do you have water rights to some sort of waterway, a river or a creek? Do you have a dam? Do you actually cross over with or have access to town water? Do you need to get it trucked in? Knowing that you've got a reliable source of water for your livestock, as well as growing the pastures that they need, is something that you need to be on top of. The quantity is going to change depending on the time of year and depending on the type of livestock that you've got. So obviously at this time of the year, it's really dry and it's hot. So your livestock are going to be drinking more water. But even if it's spring, the grass is green, which means it's holding more moisture. Therefore, they're going to be drinking less. But if you've got lactating animals, they are putting a lot of water towards making that milk for their babies or for you if you're milking them. So, knowing the type of animal and what the purpose of that animal is can affect how much water it is that they are going to require. Making sure that it's available to everybody. You might have a trough there, but it might be too high up for a lamb. So, how are you going to make sure that they're able to get into it? And is it accessible? And there's some examples of water. So, we've got our dam there. You can see that there's a drain there that leads in. We've got tanks, they come off our sheds. This is our creek. This is when my ferals were a bit younger. We had a flood. We actually couldn't get out that day because the drain that was leading out on the road meant that we couldn't get out. So they had no school that day and we went down and they, of course, went into the water and got exceptionally wet. And of course, we've got troughs in every single paddock that's giving them access to water, and we go out and clean them periodically as well. This is an example. This is our farm layout. And so on here, you can see that we've got this one main entrance here. We've got a lot of the infrastructure in relation to sheds and things quite near there. That's our cattle yards down there to the left. We've got that ability to have rotational grazing happening here. We've got the ability to quarantine. If a vet needs to come, they don't need to go anywhere out on the property, provided that we are reasonably prepared for that. Obviously, if there is an animal who's down on the other side of the property because they've gotten really sick out of the blue, okay. But generally, especially if they're lambing or calving, we make sure that they are in paddocks that are easily accessible. So this big front paddock here on the left, that's our calving paddock because that is right where the yards are and it's not far for a vet to go. If we're lambing, we've actually got a little lambing paddock that is right near that shed, which is right next to my house. And I can actually hear my sheep lambing and I will get up in the middle of the night and check on them if I know that they are lambing and I make sure that they are safe. So that's just an example of a layout. You can see we've got a lot of tree breaks there, and they are there to provide shelter for the animals as well as shade for the pasture as well. So once you've assessed all of your capabilities on your land, all of those, then you need to assess your enterprises. And that is, what do they actually need? And so that's really going to depend on what it is that you want them to do. So I'm not going to go into that today. Do you have that? And that's including livestock suitability to the land. If you don't, you either need to change or improve your resources, or you need to change or improve your enterprise ideas. Because, as I said before, with that Venn diagram, you really want them to overlap each other as much as you possibly can. So that's pretty much it from me. I'm really hoping that it's basic. It's covered quite a lot of stuff there. And I've really rushed through things. If you do have that handout, the bottom part there is a table. What would you need for your ventures? And it talks about water, infrastructures, what you must have long term, suitability of feed, stocking rates and climate, and the land, the size of the paddocks, the soil capability. So that's just sort of to get your brain ticking over some of those things that you might need to think about if you are looking to start putting animals or doing things with your land, or if you're really not sure what it is that you're looking at. So I'm going to pass back over to Jack.
Thanks, Christine. We'll get into a few questions. So if you want to send any through, they're anonymous as well. So I can't tell who sent them. So yeah, you can send through whatever that you want answered. I just got a few here for you, Christine. So how would you go about delegating some tasks? Like, is it better to try doing yourself, or is it better to get a professional to do it? Like examples such as like fencing, if you have a broken fence and you haven't done it before.
So I guess that comes down to, what are you willing to learn? If you're willing to learn how to do your fencing, then awesome. Get someone to teach you how to do your fencing. But if it's quite highly specialized, so for example, if you've got electric fences and you don't know how to use them, and you don't know how they're all wired up, it might be best to have somebody come in and do that for you. Things like horse fences, I know, are quite specialized, and I would be getting equestrian fencers to come in and do those. But if fencing is something that you're happy to learn how to do and you think that it looks like something you could do and you could have the equipment there, you could have the wire and you could have the gripples and you could have the tensioners, do it. It makes you so much more versatile. It means that you are not reliant on contractors and whether they're able to come out or not. So I always say, if you can do it, you're going to save yourself money. You're going to save yourself being at the being reliant on other people who may not be able to come out and do the things that you want to do. But it really does depend on what your capabilities are. I'm sorry, that's a very roundabout answer.
All right. Thank you for that. There's a few people mentioning the handout. We had a bit of issues at the start, so I actually didn't get around to sending that. So
Ah,
I'll email these slides out as well with that worksheet, so you can fill that in, and we'll give you a bit more idea. Christine puts that together. It's will really help you guys out. I got another one here. So, what would you say some essential like starting infrastructure is, and like the types that you look for when purchasing the farm. So like stuff that are already existing. Is there the main essentials? I know you mentioned quite a few in that, but if you did purchase it, what would be the main things?
Um, that's kind of like how long is a piece of string because it really depends on what you want to do with your land. And that's why I'm saying you need to go back to that question of what is it that you want to do. And if you can nut out what it is that you want to do, you can then go, all right, so I'm going to need X, Y, and Z to be able to do that. So I know that's really vague. Usually something that everybody is wanting is good fencing, making sure that the posts aren't rotten, making sure they're not falling over, making sure that the assemblies are all really nice and tight. So fencing is usually a good one. Having some sort of shed structure that's preferably not falling apart would be great. And as I said, water. Water is a really big one, but it really comes down to, well, what do you want to do? And that can be difficult to work out if you're not really sure, but nut sitting there and nutting it out, going like if you need to go back through the presentation because it will be sent with you, that might help you, or use the handout, but work out what you want, and that's going to help you to then work out what you're going to need. There's If you are thinking, I really want dairy goats, okay, cool. Maybe go and speak to a local dairy goat breeder and find out, well, what are all the things that they've got there that maybe you're going to need to invest in? If you're thinking that you want to have sheep, well, A, why do you want the sheep? What's the purpose for them? Are you going to want them to have babies? Because if they're going to have babies, you're going to need much more different fencing than you would need if they're literally just out in the paddock mowing the grass. You're going to need the ability to be able to lock them up so you can catch those babies and then tag them and dock them and castrate them if that's what you need. You need to have an area where they can be shorn if they're woolly ones. So I know that I don't feel like I've been very helpful with this, but I just go back to that original question of, well, what do you want? And if you know what you want, you'll then be able to nut out what you need for that. But breeders can be a really, really big help with that.
Yeah, beautiful. We got one here. It's a bit of a two-parter. So, is it possible to build a dam on any land, or does that depend on the soil type? And do you always need a creek to fill it, or is there other ways?
Um, it would depend on your soil type. If you've got really sandy soil, you're probably going to have less luck. You The people that do dam construction would have a better idea of that. Our dam doesn't fill from a creek. It fills from runoff. Some of it is actually the small dam fills from the runoff, which comes from the houses and the sheds. And then when that overflows, it heads out to the other one. And we get a lot of runoff just from the paddocks, but we've dug those. I'm using my hands and you can't see me because if I have the video on, you can't hear me. We've got those drains that when the water is past saturation point, it will sit on the surface and it will go down. So we've then built those drains, those works, the conservation works, to actually capture that water and then ferry it to our dams. But you need to have some way that it can sort of go downhill a bit. But your dam builders would be much better able to sort of look at what you've got and tell you whether it's possible or not. And that does depend on the lay of your land.
Yeah, beautiful. We have one about a bit about carrying capacity. So, is there a way to easily work out how many animals you can have on a property without causing erosion and still keeping ground cover, or is that just trial and error kind of work?
Um, no. So that kind of comes down to, remember how I said before about the vegetation, and you can do a quadrat and you can work out what's the density, but you kind of need to know the different types that are there as well. So if you can work out, and I've done it, you can then take samples of the grass that is there, you dry it in your oven, you work out the amount of, because if it's got the water in it, the water is not nutritionally useful. So you dry that material out, It's provided that it's useful. If it's barley grass, it's no use. It's not useful. If it's a weed, it's not useful. But you dry it out in your oven and then you weigh it. And then that there's a process, but you can then determine roughly, all right, well, how much dry matter have actually got out there in my paddock? All right, how much is it that my animals would need to be eating in a day to be healthy? And so a lot of this is available on, I think, on sites like the MLA and things like that, and they'll walk you through that process. And it is something that I've done with clients in the past as well. Um, and so you can kind of work that out. But as I said, you've got to look at your vegetation at different times of the year. So right now, a lot of places don't have a lot of vegetation because it is so dry and nothing is growing. And if they do still have some and they've got stock running on it, it's going to decrease at some point unless we get some rain fairly soon. So it is going to flow and ebb a little bit depending on the time of the year. So yes, you can do it, but you've sort of got to be aware of what you've got out there and know that process of working it out. I hope that was clear in my answer.
Yeah, perfect. We got one for a bit about land care. I don't know if you know too much about land care, Christine. So, is it worth joining a local land care or ag group at all? And might they have local knowledge and advice?
Yes. That's an easy one. Yep.
Question done.
Yep. Yep. Do that. Yep.
Yeah. So we might include some more info about land care in the next one. I might do a slide on just some further resources, but land care are a very helpful organization and definitely join if you can. So just search them online in your local area.
Yeah.
So
And you're right, because they do have a lot of that local knowledge as well, and they
yeah,
can be
yeah, they're very
fabulous.
suited for their area. There's a lot of different I
Yeah.
think groups. So there's a question on soil. So, do you need different knowledge of the geological substrates and to choose from, like a good farm? Or can you do that, like, can you measure that before you purchase the land, or can you only do it after?
I lost you for parts of that.
Oh, sorry. So there's just a question on soil. So do you need, before buying the property, is there a way to look at the soil before and measure it, or is that only can be done after you purchase a property?
Oh, okay. Um, so there are sites where you can sort of see roughly what the types of soils are. Um, you sort of need to know, I can't remember what the one is that I use. It's just completely flown out of my head. Um, you could ask to do a soil test, and that is something that I do recommend for people after they've purchased. I can't do a soil test for anybody because I don't have the chemical lab, but they will do pretty much whatever you want them to do. They'll look at the biological, they'll look at the nutrients, they'll look at kind of what type it is. And if you send them off to specific labs, they'll actually tell you what you need to do to suit. If you put on there what the use of the land is, they'll tell you what changes you may need to make to be able to suit that. But if you just need to be aware that if you're doing soil testing, the results can depend on the time of the year. So if you do it in the middle of winter when nothing is growing because it's really cold, you're going to get really different results to what you would get if you did it in the middle of spring. So yes, there are sites you can see roughly what the soil type is. I'll look it up later and I'll send it through to you, Jack, what the site that I use is. Sometimes it's a bit haphazard, but it usually gives me a rough idea of what the soil type is in that area.
As I said, so Christine can send me some stuff that she thinks would be good included, and I can send it through to everyone's email. So I'll also include that workbook as well, the worksheet, for you to fill out. Also, I've got a question here, it kind of relates to like professional help with the soil testing. So, if you're overwhelmed with the decision of buying farm, is there any other professional services that can help you?
Um, in oh, I feel like saying in what way? Um, Like, yeah, I'm sorry because I know the questions are anonymous, and so that's a bit hard. I get, yeah. In what way are you overwhelmed? What is it that has got you going, I really don't know what I'm looking for or what I want to do with it. Um, I feel like I need more information to be able to answer that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. That's a lot of different options there, so it's hard to be specific to everyone without knowing the information. So if you're buying a farm, and would how would you know if it's worth purchasing if it's somewhat neglected? Like if it's covered in weeds, would it that be more like effort than it's worth?
Um, I guess it depends on what you want to do with it and what your time and your money is like. If it's just weedy because it's been neglected, you can do that soil test and go, actually, yep, it's pretty good. There's some pretty good soil down there. It's just that nobody's looked after it and it literally just needs a couple of years of management. So I guess it depends on what your priorities are. But if your priority is, I just want to get on there and I want to have my animals and I want them to be happy now, then it's probably not worth it. But if you've got the time and the money and the energy to do it, it can be worth it. So again, I that's a bit of an ambiguous answer and it really depends on your circumstances. And I feel really bad because I'm coming down to a lot of these answers and going, kind of depends on what you want to do. Um, and that I feel like I'm not being very helpful in that regard, and I'm really sorry.
No, that's all right. So there's also another one a bit ambiguous. So, in general, so if you, I don't know how much you know about machinery, but a good first small tractor, what implements or accessories do you think are needed? Like, what ones would you find that get used the most when starting out?
Depends on the size of your block. If you can get away with just a ute, great. But if it gets really wet so that you can't take a ute out there, you will probably need a tractor, but then it just depends on the size of your block and what it is that you want to do with it. So we've got three tractors, but we don't use the old Fergie because it's literally 80 years old. So it just sits there and is kind of decorative. We've got a small Massey Fergie that we mostly just use for fencing purposes. We put a carry-all on it, which is awesome. Um, and we sometimes use it for plowing, but it's old. It doesn't have an enclosed cabin. So if there is some reason, like especially if it's a hot day and you want to be in an air conditioned comfort, then you can't do it with that tractor. So sometimes the little old cheap ones are okay, but then you've got to think about your comfort that doesn't necessarily have headlights. And then we've got a big Kubota, and that does heaps. That does so much for us. We feed cows out with it. It's got the spike, it's got the forklifts, it's got the post hole digger on the back, which is amazing. That was a real game changer for us. But if you were on a really small property, you wouldn't need those things. So again, it comes down to what do you want to do on your farm and what do you need to do that? So if you can get away with just a ute, I would say use a ute because you're going to have that air conditioned and the heater and you're able to take it out on the road, which you can't do with a tractor. You can load your ute up with your hay and your feed and your whatever. You can fit more than one person in it. So if you can get away with a ute, we use a ute most of the time. That is the thing that we used to use our little grey Fergie. That was the thing when I was a kid. We would all pile onto the back of the carryall, and that was what we went away and did things on. But now we just use a ute, and that's what we use for everything until it's too wet. So implements, the fork is great. The carryall, got to have carryall. That's awesome. Post hole digger, but that's because we're building fences. Um, we've got a sprayer, and we've actually got that connected up at the moment for in case we've got a grass fire. Because yes, we do spraying, or we'll spray out chemicals occasionally, or we will spray out Johnny Carp. I think it was Johnny Carp. That was awesome. But we have it also there, literally at this time of the year, so we can put out spot fires if we have to. So the sprayers, fabulous. Mm, plows, but they're different types of plows depending on what we're doing with them.
So we got one here. So has the demand for small holdings like hobby farms or specialized agribusiness changed over the last 5 years?
I think it's just sort of got a bit of a turnover because I think that a lot of people buy into a small property thinking it's going to be a certain thing and then discovering that it's not. And going, oh, that was a lot harder than I thought it would be. And so they kind of give up. I wouldn't necessarily say that the demand has changed. I just think that the turnover is there. It's hard because I know down here where I am, it's so damned expensive. I am so incredibly lucky to live where I do because there is no way that I would ever be able to afford anything like this. I'm so lucky that my grandfather bought it when he did. Um, but if you're in, we can't subdivide. We're in a green wedge. So, and there's a huge chunk of Mornington Peninsula that is green wedge. And so basically most of these properties can't be subdivided. They can't be made smaller and they need to be used for some sort of agricultural purpose. Um, but I know that in other areas they are increasing the number of farms and things that are there, those peri-urban areas. So possibly in those areas, but I know down here it's not really changing that much. It's just there's a turnover. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, there's a lot has changed since COVID as well.
Yes.
With how much farms cost. If you have any more questions, guys, send them in because we'll have one or two more. We got one here. So this is quite broad as well, but the lowest maintenance animal out of sheep, cattle, and goats if you're just starting out, or does it just depend on the type of farm you're buying?
I would avoid cattle because they're big. Um, and if you discover that you don't like them, you can't necessarily transport them yourself. You would need to get someone specialized in to transport. So I would avoid cattle personally. Um, goats or sheep. I guess it depends on what you want them to do. Be aware, I get so many people that ring me saying, I want to buy a goat because it will eat my grass. And I say, no, no, it won't. Goats don't eat grass. They are browsers, not grazers. What you want is a sheep. Um, so I suppose in some ways sheep are easier, but then you've got to deal with, well, they need to be shorn unless you get the sort that shed. Goats often have horns, so just be aware of that unless they get disbudded. A lot of the dairies will be naturally like we disbud them. That's part of what we do to ensure that they don't get their heads caught in fences. It's a lot easier to use than milking equipment. They're not going to hurt us or each other. So I guess it kind of just depends on what you're capable of doing. So they are both goats and sheep need to have their hooves trimmed fairly regularly. Don't try it and do it in summer because you can't. It's like trying to cut concrete. So you do it more in when it's wet. So more would just come down to, I guess, what do you want it to do? But I wouldn't go cattle if I'm just starting out. And if you're just starting out, do you want them to have babies? Do you want them to just be there and look pretty? Do you want them to just eat grass? If you want them to have babies, it's a lot easier to help sheep and goats along with babies. I can't pull a calf out, but I can stick my hand in and I can pull a lamb out. I can pull a kid out within reason. I'm not a vet, but I know basically what to do and I know when to call for help. Whereas if a calf is stuck, I have to call for help. I can't do that at all. I don't have the know how to pull a calf out. So that's what I would do. I would narrow it down to those two and then look at breeds.
All right, we've got a question about tree breaks and trees on the property. So, how important are trees on the property for stopping erosion and shade for the animals, or do they just minimize the land that you can use for agriculture?
No, so I did touch on that and I said they are actually proven to help reduce erosion. They help to increase the soil moisture, especially from wind evaporation. As long as you're strategically placing them, like you don't want like trees sort of anywhere and everywhere, but if you're putting them in the right places so that they are able to protect your livestock from especially wind, because in winter that wind can be pretty cutting. So, but it's putting the right trees in the right places. If you're putting, we've got stands of red gums because we've got areas where the water gets really, the soil gets quite waterlogged. So we've put red gums because the trees are able to cope with that and they're helping to remove some of that water from the soil. So I am a very strong advocate for tree breaks. I think they have a lot of advantages. So, but I'm biased. So, you might be asking the wrong person, but the literature that is out there, the data that is out there is saying that tree breaks are good for your pasture. They are actually going to improve your pasture, provided that they're in the right places.
All right, if that's all the questions everyone has, I'd like to thank Christine for the presentation. Yeah, it was awesome, and I hope everyone learned some things. So we'll send out an email including the presentation and that workbook for you to fill in. So a reminder, we've got part two of this tomorrow night, again with Christine. So that's on getting livestock ready, such as buying and introducing animals to your farm. So please tune into that if you're around, and yeah, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks very much,
Mhm.
Jack.
No worries.